Hey everyone, I'm Andy Smith. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Black Box Intelligence, and welcome to this edition of our Lessons from the Field series. This is where we tap into the expertise of industry leaders to explore key challenges and opportunities in the restaurant space. So today I am thrilled to be joined by a very special guest, Belinda Kyle, who's the Chief People Officer at Biscuitville. Belinda is an award-winning restaurant industry vet, having started out in ops before moving into HR. We'll get into Biscuitville in a second, but for anyone who doesn't know, it's a much loved QSR brand focused on the breakfast day part. Founded in 1966 and is now at more than 85 locations in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. So, Belinda, welcome. How are you doing today? I hope I got all that right. So, please correct me if I got any of that wrong. My research came up short.
You did. Good job. Good job.
All right, thank you. So I was wondering to start, could you share a bit about your journey? Because checking out your profile before this started, before we got going here, I noticed you had started in ops, quite an interesting career development for sure. So I'd assume that gave you an excellent perspective for this current role here that you're doing.
It does. It absolutely does. I started in the operations side of the business, which really does shape everything that I do and how I show up as a chief people officer today. When you've been responsible for having to staff a shift, call outs, manage labor in real time, and feel the pressure of taking care of your guest, you learn very quickly that any of those people strategies must work in a real restaurant and not just in theory. When I started at Biscuitville in 2022 as their chief people officer, that operator lens has helped to keep me grounded and really kind of focus on what's practical as well as scalable in terms of solutions.
Yeah, and do you mind just digging into that background a little bit? I know you've been at a few brands, and then how have you managed to wind up where you're at?
Well, I've done a little, I like to say been there, done that in terms of where I've been. I actually started with McDonald's and started as a crew person there. And that's really where I learned management and leadership, to be quite honest. That's what really got me started. I was with them for about 8 years and managed their restaurant that was actually in Las Vegas on the Strip. Okay, so the one that's
Wow.
right next to Circus Circus. So yeah, definitely, ugh, got my chomps there for sure. And then I would say, I went from there and went more into the full service side and was with a company called Macaroni Grill for about
Oh yeah.
17 years. And there I did a variety of different roles as well. I started in operations, then moved into their training department, then moved over to the people side of the business in terms of HR, and left there as a senior director to go to a company out in New York, okay, that was called Dinosaur Barbecue. So I was their VP of people for them and then really kind of journeyed back out to the West, okay, back to Portland, Oregon, and then ended up in Las Vegas where I was helping out my family and did a lot of consulting work before I interviewed with Biscuitville. So that's what really got me to Biscuitville. So lots and lots of different roles, but a lot of it really primarily based, I would say, in the HR side of the business in terms of recruiting, generalist, all that good stuff.
Yeah, certainly sounds like you've got your industry credibility points here. It seems like you've done a lot of kind of amazing stuff that's kind of built to this part. So tell me about Biscuitville. Obviously, it's not a young brand, um, and it's a regional brand. So tell me about it for anyone who might not be familiar. Given it operates in those three states down there. Yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, really, it's a family-owned brand. Like you said before, it's got 60 years of history, and it's very intentional in terms of its operating model. And I think that's really what attracted me. It's really breakfast and lunch only. It closes at 2 p.m. And, I think that closing at 2 p.m. wasn't just an operational decision, it was really a cultural commitment. Life after two gives our team members really a predictable schedule, and we respect the fact that they've got lives outside of work, which is quite honestly, from my experience, very rare in this industry, especially with QSR.
Right. So tell me about the Life After Two program or philosophy. I don't even know if you call it a program. I feel like it, from what I could tell, it goes back a very long way. So this is kind of a very big part of who you guys are as a brand. But tell me about it and like how does it help you? It feels like it must be a bit of a benefit or a kind of advantage when it comes to recruiting, good talent.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think that for a lot of folks that are coming from the QSR industry, this is really kind of a surprise for them and a very unique surprise because I know that, if we close at 2, they're probably out of there about 3 o'clock, and that's really unusual. So the quality of life factor is huge. And I think that I would say almost every single operator that we've interviewed or we've brought on board has really benefited from that. I mean, they get a chance to be able to go home, have dinner with their family, be able to be with the kids with school, be able to go to, family things. I mean, so it really does kind of play into that. And I think that when you look at our type of industry in terms of, gosh, just the number of hours that a general manager or operator is going to put into the business, this really kind of helps them to be able to plan a life outside of that, when typically you wouldn't be able to do that.
Curious, like, how's it helped you in terms of like, has it helped you lower turnover, attract people easier, etc., etc.?
Yeah, I think it really has helped from the recruiting side for sure. Okay. And I think it helps to differentiate us ourselves in terms of other, you know, companies that are out there. Like definitely if we're competing with, McDonald's or some of those that are open 24 hours, definitely this is a huge quality of life that they wouldn't necessarily get. But I think from when you think about it from an ROI standpoint in terms of return on investment, really, and again, I've utilized black box intelligence information for quite some time. And so I have no problem. I'm going to plug you here, okay? But it really
Oh, please
does
don't mind.
allow you, it really does allow you to kind of validate your internal results against what the industry norms are. And prior to black box, that really wasn't available. Like you had to either if you had contacts or things of that nature, but otherwise you really wouldn't have any idea where the industry standards were at. And so when you look at turnover, particularly when we look at early tenure and management turnover, Biscuitville has always consistently performed favorably compared to similar concepts. And I really think that that stability in terms of, knowing that we've got people that are going to have some tenure has reduced our training costs. It's really improved our productivity, and really it strengthens the guest experience at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. Um, So, employee retention is a challenge for anyone and everyone. Now, clearly, we talked about the 2 o'clock closure and Life After Two program. But is there anything else how else do you think about turnover? Like, how important is it to you? How do you monitor it? And then how do you kind of impact it?
Um, I think for Biscuit, that fact that we've got that predictable schedule, okay, really helps us to kind of lean into those things in terms of leadership capability, their connection, growth, really the competitive compensation end of it. And compensation really does matter, right? I mean, we want to make sure that we're hitting the benchmarking data to make sure we're attracting all the best talent that we possibly can, and really ensure salary and bonus structures are really at the best that they possibly can in terms of being competitive. But, we also recognize the fact that pay is kind of the pace. It's really the price to get in, right? It's the entry ticket. Leadership quality and how the work gets done are what sustain the retention end of it. We kind of found out a few years ago, we did a couple of different surveys in terms of employee engagement, and really found out that our team members are hungry for development. And so we really worked on some other things like creating some competency models that allowed us to kind of create a common language. And along with that common language, development, right? So understanding does it really take to make great performance in a position, and being able to lean into those competencies to give people the development that they really wanted and needed to be able to grow with Biscuitville or take it outside and grow the career someplace else.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, how do you think about general manager, or GM recruitment then? Because, we see in our data all the time, it's something we talk about. The longer tenure you have with a GM, just basically all the other metrics seem to go up. You're going to retain people better, you're going to turn over less, and then generally they perform better from the pure like sales and traffic perspective. So, how do you think about general manager recruitment? It sounds like you have a big program to push people into those roles once they come in at kind of lower levels. So, how do you think about that and the importance of those GMs in your business?
Well, I think the GMs are really the cornerstone, right? They're the folks that actually take care of their team. Okay. And, the old adage that people don't, quit jobs, they quit bosses, right? And so leadership becomes a huge piece of that puzzle, and making sure that you've got people who've been around and can help their team be successful is really the impact. And I think when you come back to Life After Two, Okay, so this doesn't just show up in terms of like a cultural piece, right? This is really about being also a huge business driver, right? So this allows people to really focus. They can put their best efforts in and the time when they come into work and when they leave. And you just don't get to always see that in other QSRs. And I think that is really what makes it special. And Black Box kind of lends into that in terms of understanding from the benchmarking side of it.
Mm. Yes, very good. So I hear you got some plans to open some locations this year. Um, like how big are those plans? And then typically, how do you even think about staffing going into a new market and that sort of stuff?
Well, as we grow, we look at this in terms of how do we grow talent benches, right? I mean, that's really the key to success in terms of growth of any business. And our goal is really to promote within anytime we possibly can. Whenever possible, we're going to promote from within. And so, I think being able to understand what the risk might be involved in terms of going into a new market or a different market, and being able to use data that we receive to be able to leverage that to understand exactly what the needs are, okay, has helped us to be more intentional in terms of how we staff and how we look at retention within that particular market. So as we continue to grow, we'll continue to use that data to be able to leverage it to make good decisions.
Um, can you talk about specifically how you use black box intelligence? You talked about like some new store openings, benchmarking against the market for turnover, and how the Life After Two program kind of helps that. Can you talk a little bit about well, how you use it now, and then potentially like if you've used it previously in your career, and talk about that as well.
I think in the past, I used a lot of it in terms of just turnover and really being able to identify patterns. Okay, so, the great thing about Black Box, it allows you to kind of slice and dice in a lot of different ways. Okay, so you can kind of go to the very granular. So you can come down to like where an actual market really exists to more regional as well as national. So being able to kind of look at that information and be able to look at where those patterns, where those trends might be, looking at what's really getting performance based on tenure helps you to kind of overlay your company or your business and say, okay, let's make some really good intentional decisions, okay, that aren't just more reactionary. Well, you can't chase it. It needs to be something that you're really thoughtful about and to understand that data and kind of make sure what are those correlations really telling you.
Yeah, and do you have a good example of that? Any interesting nuggets that the data has kind of helped you drive a good decision in your business that's helped kind of move it forward?
Yeah, I think the big one is something we've already kind of mentioned. Manager tenure really drives everything, okay, in terms of the restaurants. Not just the hourly retention, but the financial performance is a big one, and also guest sentiment, right? I think there's a business theory that's the service, oh goodness gracious. How I know it is this, okay, is that the guest experience is never going to exceed the team members. Okay. So if you're not taking care of your team members, you're not going to have any guests. And I think that kind of plays into it. And the way that you're going to take care of your team members is have a strong leadership, especially at that GM operator level. So I would say some other examples in terms of how we've really leaned to this, what I mentioned before, is we've really gone after this competency model. We've tailored it closer to Corn Ferry, to some degree, okay, but it's really helped us to kind of identify what does it really take for an operator to be successful in a role? What competencies are important? How about for an assistant manager? And we've overlaid it also into our RSC. So for our restaurant support center, we utilize that as well to be able to look at different positions and understand exactly what is it that they're doing, what will make them successful in that position, and then how can we create development around that.
Right, and so that dictates, I presume, your training and how you measure their performance, everything like that. It's all in there. That's really cool.
It's all in there, yes.
We'll talk about training then. So, like, it's really interesting to me that you kind of obviously looking to promote from within. Now, if you're looking at that kind of from a leadership level, there's some risk there, right? You're putting people into positions they don't have direct experience for, but they have like great potential for. So, how do you ensure the potential's realized?
So we've been really fortunate. The learning platform that we use is called Scoots. It's allowed us to be able to take a look at positional training and really put a lot of information in there to take care of someone at the baseline. What we're working on now is more of the leadership development piece. Again, you want to build that, you want to build a platform of people like a pipeline, right? To be able to feed
Yeah.
what you need from a leadership standpoint. So what we've done is that we're looking at leadership to say, if you're a shift leader, what does it take for you to be successful as an assistant manager? And if you're an assistant manager, what does it take for you to be successful as an operator, and so forth and so on, to build them up through the area director and above. And so looking at that competency piece we were talking about, it's helped us to kind of identify exactly what leadership skill sets. Now, there's lots of soft skills out there, but there's also the things in terms of just using a lot of the tactical things in terms of the day to day, what the payroll system, right?
Yeah.
Being able to navigate some of those pieces of the puzzle. So we're building kind of this pipeline of success, okay, for each of these positions to help people to be able to grow into bigger roles, and hopefully not to be running by the time they get into it. We want them to be able to feel comfortable, confident, to
Yeah.
walk into a new position and feel like I can do this because I've already been doing this. I've already had practice. And so that they can feel much more successful as they get into it.
So I'm assuming general managers in your restaurants, it's kind of on the onus is on them, or they're kind of targeted for like helping build that pipeline, right? It sounds like that's part of it.
It is part of it. Like the area directors who are right above the operators, and so they'll have anywhere between like 6 to 8 locations that they
Hmm.
support. Okay, help the operator to be able to identify talent within their own like four walls. Okay, and then developing plans for each of those folks. That's ideally what we're working through right now, is helping those operators to be able to identify that talent, and then how do we give them the coaching and development that they need to be able to grow into bigger roles. And so we look at this at all levels. It also includes when we look at our restaurant support center. So it's kind of the same thought process, is that, if we have a need or we want somebody who's going to be stepping in from succession planning, then we need to know exactly where that's at. We also use a tool with the area directors called, it's called the SPTM. Okay, we love love our little abbreviations, but it means succession planning and talent management. Not new, okay, but having those conversations on a regular basis to help the teams really kind of go back and take a look at that in terms of who's maybe next in line, who's the next person for us to promote, who needs development in certain areas, so we can make sure people are getting the things that they need.
Yeah, well, you're talking to someone from like a company that's an acronym BBI, so we're all for acronyms as well. I think we share that together. So
Yes, we love that. We love it.
uh, so you talked about obviously a lot of help to the GMs, etc. Can you talk about any other ways you enable them with hiring or anything like that? Like talk about that relationship, because I always think HR's in a kind of in the HQ or whatever you want to call it. But a lot of it is what happens on the ground. You mentioned your experience before in terms of you came from the operator background, so I'm imagining that kind of comes a bit easier to you than it might come to you if you didn't have that experience. But can you talk about what that looks like in practice?
Yeah, I think you do have to have people who have boots on the ground, right? So we
Mhm.
have our people excellence managers, and they are actually out in the field. They have a number of restaurants and area directors that they support. And so they are there. And I think the biggest way that we're able to help is that we do employee engagement surveys twice a year. Okay. And so utilizing that information to be able to see like who's doing a great job, maybe somebody has maybe a bit of a gap, because trust me, operators don't need more dashboards. They don't need more things that they can kind of click into. They actually need folks who can tell them to simplify very actionable things. And I think that when we get our employee engagement results, we're not looking for an action plan of 100 items. It's usually 1 to 2. And really, our PEX team, that's what we call our people excellence team. Our PEX team is there with them to support how they create those plans, and then helping to support that it actually gets done, right? So we force them, well, I shouldn't say force, okay. We ask them to post it,
Yeah.
and then that way it's something that actually it's like more accountability from their team as well, to say, hey, we recognize that you're asking for this and we're going to do that. And so I think that piece has also helped, and it keeps it very simple that you can change behaviors that are then going to drive more retention. And of course, the best people to bring other employees in is the team that you currently have. So being able to recommend that Biscuitville is a great place to work is really kind of our ideal.
Yeah, I love the simplicity point. I mean, I think this is true in pretty much any business. Like, you give someone a massive jobs list, like probably nothing's going to get done. If they, especially if they've got a day job, right? That takes up a lot of time. But two things, people can do that. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, how do you get to the two things? And it might be a hard question to answer because I get that it's going to be very circumstantial and specific to the person, but like, I just think that's such an amazing approach.
Well, everybody gets it. Like I said, we it's really the employee engagement survey. Okay,
Hmm.
so the information that it generates out helps us identify the behaviors that we need to address in a restaurant to help folks to feel more engaged, right? So if we've got the team feeling like they're being supported, they're respected, they're being well taken care of, people are interested in them being successful long term. And it's a great working environment, right? They feel safe and secure. And so if there's that employee engagement survey looks at all those pieces, okay? And so what it kind of I want to say spits out is that we're going to go back and kind of take a look at that information with the operator GM, and we're going to review it together to make sure that what's coming out of that, what kind of behaviors could we change? Like what can we own? And what can we do a really great job on those one or two items? So it's not guessing. We're really taking data and kind of simplifying that out to kind of figure out what are the drivers of engagement and then what are the behaviors that we can take care of.
Yeah, and do you do any measurement of HR metrics and how they correlate to, guest experience, any guest experience measurement you do, or traffic sales, financial performance type analysis that you do? Like, how do you think about that kind of, sync up?
uh, all of our restaurants have what's called a scorecard. So as you can imagine, there's similar things in that scorecard, like you were just talking about. There's the revenue angle in terms of like sales. How are we doing from that standpoint? There's also from the guest experience. There's a measurement for that. There's a measurement for turnover. There's a measurement for even staffing inside their restaurants to make sure that they're hitting the staffing goals that they need. Okay. And then the overall in terms of, profit center income that comes at the end of the day, right? So I think that by looking at all those metrics, we're tied to those very closely from a turnover standpoint, and especially paying attention to do we see that and are we seeing patterns, right? So, and we measure it because it's on a monthly basis. We're able to almost in real time be able to see concerns or opportunities and to be able to celebrate successes with our team. So yeah, we're tied very closely with all of those metrics. For myself in general, because I've had the operations background, I look at that correlation and work with my team to say what are we seeing and what can we do differently.
In terms of advice to other HR leaders, like really anything. I mean, you've obviously you must have like a ton of wisdom from all the HR roles you've had and the operations background, all that stuff. So I'm really curious, like, what advice would you give to any kind of up and coming restaurant HR professional operator, etc. When it comes to like getting the typical HR challenges, so getting turnover under control, etc., etc.
You have so much data out there, that you can get at this point in time, but be smart about it, right? Don't chase benchmarking information blindly. Use it for what it's meant to be used for, is for you to understand how the work is getting done and where you compare in terms from a market standard. So this way, you know where to target. You can be smart about the decisions that you make and be intentional about it. I think I've seen a lot of folks who chase compensation because they think that's the doorway to success in terms of just give them more money and they will come. But that's not necessarily the case. It's just a starting point. And I think that it's more about the leadership piece, right? We've talked a lot about that from a development standpoint. And I think that pay attention to how you're taking care of your team, give them the development that they need to be successful and take care of their teams. And I think that at that point, the financial piece of it will always come, and you're always going to be super successful in the role that you're in. So pay attention to all of it, but benchmarking is just a tool. Okay. It just kind of helps you directionally know where to go. Okay. But don't chase after it. You'll take care of business and it will come.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, that's amazing. So, I think we've kind of worked through our question list here, and again, really, 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 really appreciate the time here. Um, I mean, it's been great talking to you. Feel like I've learned a lot. I hope anyone listening has learned a lot. But yeah, really appreciate the conversation. So thanks so much for the time and doing this with us here. I hope
And
you
it's been a
enjoyed it
pleasure.
too.
Thank you so much.
I hope you've enjoyed it too.
It was great. It was great.
All right. So, again, Belinda, thanks so much for sharing your insights today. I think it's been super valuable, insightful, and certainly we're very grateful for your openness and commitment to sharing to the restaurant community. We find it a lot in this industry. I think it's what makes it very special that everyone's almost rooting for each other, despite the kind of competitive pressures that everyone is under. So, really appreciate that, and definitely been a great discussion from my perspective too. So, we'll be back for another Lessons from the Field. But until then, take care, and we'll see you at the next one. Goodbye.